Hi Smart Community friends, and welcome to a new month. This month we will be celebrating the theme of Movember, which is all about moving. So moving from one place to another, moving from the old ways of doing things into the new. So I'm really excited for this, and we've got some great episodes coming your way. So in this first episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a really great chat with Scott Shepard, the Chief Commercial Officer with mobility aggregator and service provider Free to Move. Scott tells us about his background in urban planning and data analytics and how that led to his focus on transportation and new mobility in cities. We discuss why empowering citizens and improving community quality of life is really the whole point of this Smart Communities movement, and the real need for regional inclusiveness when it comes to tech, mobility and planning. Scott and I discuss new ways technology can pose a risk for increasing the divide and disadvantage within our communities, and also the importance of looking past the hype in order to see those deeper problems and real implications that new tech can have on the most vulnerable people in our communities. Scott then tells us about Free to Move, and having lived in both places, he shares with us his perspective on the similarities and differences between the way the US and Europe is embracing smart mobility concepts, and the different ways that the markets are maturing. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trend of customer scrutiny and awareness around data, choices, and inclusivity. So I really hope you enjoy Movember, and as always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Regions, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play with smart communities. The future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Scott. How are you today?
Hi, Zoe. Good morning. How are you? Or good evening for you. Yes.
I am really good, and I'm really excited to be talking to you. So let's jump in, and can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Sure. So I'm Scott Shepard, Chief Commercial Officer with Free to Move, mobility aggregator and service provider. And my background is in urban planning, data analytics, mapping, and basically everything to do with cities. So I've had kind of a multifaceted or multi-dimension career, taking many different twists and turns. Started with being a geographer, mapper, cartographer. Then through many different positions, worked my way up into the field of urban and city planning. This is in the United States, primarily in California. And as I've moved along, I've really kind of focused my career specifically into transportation and now in new mobility as well as emerging technologies. And kind of over the course of the last 20 years, it's been kind of one layer building upon the next, but it's all kind of related to cities, transportation, and how people move about and how we're all connected.
Awesome. So tell us what you're really passionate about.
Well, I'm really passionate as a self-professed geek here is maps and data. So I love just how cities are structured, how they form, how they evolve over time, and all the different elements and layers. And what I've realized, like I said, over the course of my career is the one common element that binds us all together is movement and mobility and how we get around the city. So I think that's really what I've realized and kind of latched onto as something that one would be great for myself professionally as a career path, but also something that has many different aspects in terms of sustainability, social equity, and something that really benefits the common good for cities and their inhabitants.
Awesome. So what sparked your interest in this smart city space?
So in terms of the smart city space, in my current and previous roles, specifically to smart cities, it's really interesting to see how smart cities is a wide umbrella that encompasses many different aspects of, I would say, urban quality of life, whether it be, like we said, transportation, whether it be economic development, public health, especially quality of life, and other types of indicators. But specifically, smart cities, for me, are an aspect of empowering citizens and inhabitants to really utilize the best of technology as well as emerging trends to make cities more a just and safe place for their own personal and communal habits. So I think the smart cities process, which I think initially was more of a tech-driven approach, which is certainly beneficial. It's, I think from my perspective, very important when taken into the fact that if it's democratized and empowered by citizens, that they can utilize the best of different technologies, certainly to solve urban and regional challenges.
Yeah, I agree. I think that citizen empowerment is a really key aspect of it and something I've been talking a lot more about, and how as citizens in our communities, being informed about what is possible in this space and then what we want from this space as well.
Correct. And there's many different interesting aspects of kind of data democratization and citizen empowerment. I know Barcelona is doing some really great things in this, the city of New York, as well as others, in terms of really trying to take smart cities to the next level, identifying specific use cases and applying those to real problem sets to solve urban challenges versus the opposite, which is maybe a solution looking for a problem. I tend to bristle at that. I think that we need to solve real problems that are inherent in our communities now and try to build solutions around those.
That really leads to this next question, and we've kind of started answering it already, but why do you think this smart community concept is important? And I guess particularly let's talk about in the transportation space and accessibility and that type of thing. Why do you think that this concept is important for mobility?
I think it's important for mobility because many communities at the local and regional level, certainly from my perspective in North America, are stranded and disadvantaged by race and socioeconomics. They're stranded based upon lack of access to public services. They're stranded by lack of access to quality food options related to markets and restaurants. And then finally, they're stranded related to just lack of mobility options, whether it be fixed route public transit, whether it be a lack of access to their own personal automobiles, or to shared and micromobility. So I think taking a smart communities approach harnesses the best of technology in a not a one-size-fits-all, a commercial off-the-shelf software approach, but a real very intuitive perspective that basically solves specific problems at the local and community level and basically aligns with the goals so that it empowers communities and improves their overall quality of life. And this is just coming from me personally as an urban regional planner practicing in North America for many years. So basically the merge of tech, mobility, planning, and I would say regional inclusiveness is of key importance.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love regional inclusiveness. That's a great term. It's something I talk about a lot as well. Coming from Australia, which we have similar issues of the greatest expanse and having, increasing the digital divide potentially when we talk about smart cities if we only focus in on the city.
Yeah. I mean, the case in point, many studies have come out that the utilization of, let's come back to mobility, micromobility, of the rise of e-scooters in North America, specifically many cities like San Francisco, have been proven that they are utilized by one specific demographic, that demographic being me, kind of middle to upper income Caucasian males. So how does this benefit all different aspects of the demographics and population, and how can the new technologies and offerings coming from Silicon Valley venture capital benefit all populations so that we improve inclusiveness and make our community smarter?
Absolutely, because something else I talk about a lot, if we're not helping the people with the most at stake, if we don't get this right, then what's the point really? Great. I think someone like you or I, coming from our backgrounds, we've got a job, whatever, we're able to move around, we've got certain levels of privilege. If it makes our life better, great, that's great for us. But really, that's not the point of this whole exercise, because we don't want to increase that divide even further.
And that's the concern. That's the concern with each new layer or each new tech innovation that is brought to market that is heavily subsidized by investors in Silicon Valley or in China or in Israel that flood the North American and European marketplace primarily. There is the risk of increasing the digital and mobility divide. Certainly, again, back to the micromobility use case where, again, there has been great concern that the access to shared bikes, shared e-scooters, and other mobility options are heavily concentrated in districts that are touristic, that are higher income, and that basically are already saturated with mobility options, such as many cities. So we could talk about North American cities, San Diego, San Francisco, et cetera. But even now in European cities, such as Paris and Madrid, which are following the North American model and flooding touristic districts with mobility options and not necessarily aligning with urban planning or mobility goals. They're just looking for quick market expansion. They're not even looking at profitability. Their model is growth over profit. That's the Silicon Valley model. So really, it's solving no problems. It's only exacerbating new problems, essentially, in the mobility space within the smart cities umbrella, which we're describing here.
No, thanks so much for sharing that, because it's something that I've felt for a while.
It's real.
Yeah, and particularly if we go to the examples of these micro-mobility options, and it's like there's nothing inherently wrong with these things, but I also think that get too much hype and focus, and it's like, oh, look at us, we're, doing this whole smart mobility thing, and I'm just like, no, you're not connecting the regional areas, you're not connecting people that don't have access to the network now, because let's face it, they already have access to the network, they can walk around, and I just think it's a bit of a, takes the focus away from what we really should be talking about, I guess.
Well, it's a distraction or, a little bit more red herring. It's really something that, or that's more of a North American term, but yeah, it's something that really takes your eye off what's the real important issue.
Yeah. So Scott, you've worked in the US for a long time. Now you're based in Europe. How do you think both places are kind of embracing this smart city and community concept?
Well, in terms of starting in this space within mobility, transportation, and smart cities a few years ago in the United States, now being based in Europe, I'll talk about the US first and then kind of compare and contrast to Europe, some of the similarities and differences, what works, what doesn't. So in the US right now, in smart cities, what we've seen is many different, I would say, hype cycles, use cases, and domains that are starting to kind of settle out and mature, shall we say, in this space across multiple verticals and then tech offerings. But just the really high level picture, maybe the 50,000 foot level, is starting in 2016, 2017. The real hype was in IoT, smart lighting, LED lights, having just really smart sensors attached to different devices and locations and nodes that cities could demonstrate quick wins. And the large tech firms, network operators, systems integrators, I'm not going to name any names, were basically flooding cities with different smart cities tech challenges to demonstrate use cases and success. A lot of these were funded by the tech firms, basically, so that cities did not have to procure these, so that this would be their go-to market strategy. We've seen a lot of these installed in different silos, smart garbage cans, smart lights, different sensors, smart networks, perhaps aligned with public transport systems, streetcars. Kansas City is another example too. And as the market has matured, we've seen a bit less of this, and now a shift more towards solving specific challenges more at the local and regional level, aligned with specific urban planning, regional inclusive goals. Kind of parallel to this hype cycle within the smart cities domain was a bit of the first and second level hype of autonomous vehicles, which I could also classify within smart cities, certainly around 2017, 2018. autonomous vehicles reached a peak around that period of time. There was a bit of, shall we say, negative press after a certain period of time where some of the testing in open communities failed to deliver the results that were basically required, and there were some public safety challenges. And basically, we got to a point where there were many different pilots being introduced by multiple cities related to vendors who were demonstrating their new technologies on autonomous shuttles. So that was another basically evolution in autonomy within the smart cities domain of mobility. So we basically saw a peak hype cycle of IoT, industrial IoT, and then basically urban IoT. Then we have kind of personal autonomy, and then shared autonomy and autonomous pilots and shuttles, all of which went through their kind of hype cycle in North America. And the market has matured such that I would say where we're at right now with the most recent hype cycle of micromobility in 2018, 2019, we're seeing a focus back towards cities, communities, and public transport, and really trying to take a bit more of a localized, simplified approach. I think really the most grandiose perspective of smart cities or of this hype was, in fact, the emphasis on Hyperloop in 2017, 2018. I would even also classify that within smart cities. So you saw over the last 2 or 3 years all these huge flashpoints, and now we've kind of settled down into something that's much more localized and sustainable, and we're trying to right size it to specific mobility challenges. This is in North America. In Europe, we've seen a bit less of the hype cycle, certainly on the, I would say, the autonomy side, and the Hyperloop side never quite intensified on this side of the Atlantic. Certainly, there have been individual, shall we say, shared autonomy shuttles that have been demonstrated in different communities across France, Switzerland, Portugal, etc. But they have not quite gained traction yet on one end. And then two, certainly on the micromobility side, in terms of shared electrical bikes as well as scooters, we are currently still in a massive hype cycle here in Europe right now. But the difference, though, is that the regulatory landscape of Europe, as well as the structure of data governance related to GDPR, lends itself to a much more coherent and methodical coordination and integration of mobility providers with regulators and policymakers, meaning that we are going to have a bit more of a sane deployment of mobility options within European cities than we've seen in North American cities over the last 2 years. There's been a bit, like I said, of the hype in certain cities such as Paris and Madrid, but cities in Europe are really starting to learn from some of the challenges in North American cities related to this kind of peak hype in micromobility in the smart cities domain. And they're taking a bit more of a orchestrated, regulated approach to how they integrate mobility options within their domain.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And it's a really nice comparison between the two from your perspective and the mobility perspective. I'm really keen to hear about some of the projects and things that you're currently working on.
Sure. So what my focus is on at Free2Move is specifically in the business-to-business and business-to-government domain for shared mobility. Our Free2Move app, which is the world's largest aggregator of shared mobility solutions, started as a car-sharing aggregator app in 2014, 2015 in Germany for the inclusion of all different car share providers in Berlin. And it's grown across Europe and North America into the largest aggregator of different shared mobility solutions, from bikes, scooters, taxis, car share, etc. What we've done is we've harnessed the platform and technology of our B2C platform, and basically we are customizing and providing specific solutions for local and municipal governments throughout Europe and North America, and corporate enterprises to build out their shared mobility options, either for their inhabitants within a city or for employees in a corporation. So, for example, We offer specific solutions related to our mobility app that we customize, white label solution, either for cities to integrate all their mobility options for their passengers, inhabitants. And we also offer a mobility as a service, mass for business platform for corporations that basically want to offer and incentivize an alternative to their own personal vehicle usage or the company car. So that basically aligns with all of the sustainability goals as well as carbon footprint reduction that basically most, if not all, corporate enterprises are looking to aggressively achieve now in 2019, 2020. So we feel that our platform is specifically aligned with solving these real-world environmental challenges by basically providing new tech-driven options so that employees will be incentivized to change their behavior and take a more sustainable approach to mobility.
Awesome. Does it integrate public transport as well?
Correct. Yeah. So it integrates public transport information as well as ticketing and booking for the different mobility options.
Awesome. Cool. So that kind of leads to this next question about integration. How do you think we can better integrate across, different disciplines, governments, and industries? Obviously, you would have had to do that or continue to do that with the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So I would say integration can take many different forms. It can take the forms of policy. It can take the forms of governance. It can take the form of data, and it could take the form of stakeholder management. So integration is a multifaceted concept that, when thought of under the construct of smart communities, has to be executed in a fashion that hits all of those different aspects, meaning that basically in true integration of communities to technology, as well as an integration between the public and private sector. So we have many different forms of integration between stakeholders, between different domains of governance, as well as within cities and their different functions. But I would say that the integration of technology, data, governance, and stakeholders is only key when thought of under the smart cities and smart communities concept that basically aligns with inclusion as well as improvement of communities. So there has to be an outcome in sight such that it can't be just integration for the sake of integration. There has to be some realized and common benefits. And I had mentioned earlier, democratization of data and information to empower citizens to basically be better informed, be more participatory in the political electoral process. And I think basically smart communities and smart cities harnessing technology through integration can better inform citizens to basically improve the quality of life of their own communities. So I think that's one aspect too. And having a bidirectional flow of information as well as inclusion will serve as one method that basically takes the best of the soft skills and the hard skills of basically tech and social policy to improve the quality of life of our communities globally, but certainly in Europe and North America we were speaking about.
Excellent. And what do you think the emerging trends are that people aren't talking about enough?
Yeah, I would say the emerging trends are actually we're going through a bit of post hype cycle that the market is maturing and citizens are becoming better informed in terms of the options of smart cities technologies as well as mobility that have entered the marketplace. So people are better scrutinizing the alternatives and asking more direct questions in terms of how it's going to benefit their communities. So for example, in terms of the most recent, I would say, proliferation of shared mobility options, citizens are really starting to understand and really evaluate what is the best benefit for their own personal and communal activities. So, such that if there are 20 or 30 different apps or platforms for shared mobility, for taxis or scooters, they're really starting to see that perhaps there is a digital divide that has been occurring and it's widening, and people are demanding better inclusion and better integration and access to information such that we do not have corporate silos that trap consumers into closed ecosystems, or as we call walled gardens. And this has been done by many different large tech firms. I won't name names, but in Silicon Valley, in the ride-hail, the TNC industry, where platforms have been developed that basically only include the options within their own corporate structure ecosystem. And that basically excludes consumers from perhaps 80 to 90% of other choices for their mobility habits within a city. So I think citizens and inhabitants are demanding wider access, wider choice, and better quality of information so that they are not seen as a commodity, either themselves, their data, or their access to control of mobility options. So I think we're seeing a push and pull between the public and private sector, and the commoditization of consumers and their data is one of the key flashpoints right now. That is one of the trends that's emerging from this disruption in smart communities as well as shared mobility, I would say. The digital divide is widening and the market is becoming even more disruptive right now, unfortunately.
Well, it's been so great to chat with you, Scott. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you, Zoe. No, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
That's awesome. And I just have one last question. How can people connect with you?
Sure. So they can find me on LinkedIn, Scott Shepard, Shepard. You can find me, Scott Shepard, with Free to Move. You can email me, scott.shepard@freetomove.me. And basically, you can find me also on Facebook too. So 3 different channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as email.
Excellent. Well, we will put all the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you.
Great.
Thanks again for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you, Zoe. Okay, I appreciate it. Talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter @SmartComPod. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.